In a land once ripe with potential, chaos reigns. The economy of Ukraine is on the brink of collapse, a shadow of its former self. Those who once toiled in fields and factories have donned military uniforms, leaving behind the very fabric of society that sustains a nation. With every passing day, the whispers of discontent grow louder. Can you hear the silence of empty factories? The echo of a lost workforce hangs in the air, thick with despair. As the government glibly discusses power shifts and fervent calls to arms, an uncomfortable truth lingers: who will rebuild? Who will cultivate the land and pay the dues? Laws enacted to ease financial burdens have become instruments of desperation. Citizens are at the mercy of a system consumed by debts, their homes threatened. The suffering is more profound than mere financial strain, it's a moral bankruptcy, leaving scars deep within the national psyche. Negotiations with creditors have crumbled, yielding empty rhetoric instead of actionable reforms. Ukraine stands bankrupt, not just in numbers but in hope, with every promise falling like brittle leaves in autumn's chill. Taxes dwindle, and the whispers of the international community fade. The International Monetary Fund, once a beacon of support, now demands guarantees that seem unattainable. The very heart of Ukraine's economy falters monthly, as trust withers away. In Brussels, the words are stark: without the EU's assurance, no funding will flow. How can one expect aid in a land devoid of stable income and a viable industrial framework? Tensions rise as the need for real solutions becomes evident. Yet, there is none to be found, leaving the country on the precipice of total disrepair. The IMF's stance grows more concerning. Its demands are suffocating, echoing the urgency for budgetary stability in the silence of desperation. What must Ukraine sacrifice next, and for whom? The question hangs heavily in the air as the government scrambles for a lifeline. In this climate of uncertainty, where will the light of hope emerge? How much longer can the country hold its ground before it risks plunging into darkness? The struggle for survival intensifies, and the battle for trust looms larger than ever. Each day brings new challenges, and the thin veneer of stability threatens to unravel. Can Ukraine summon the strength to reclaim its future, or will it succumb to the weight of its own despair? In the preceding discussion, we explored the dire economic circumstances surrounding Ukraine. As negotiations falter and the necessary financial guarantees remain elusive, the International Monetary Fund becomes a more formidable creditor, demanding stringent conditions. Despite the rhetoric of hope, reality paints a much bleaker picture. The unyielding financial landscape exposes a crucial truth: Europe is increasingly hesitant to offer support that spirals into a cycle of debts and corruption. Billions promised seem futile within a system that fails to generate real returns. The echoes of uncertainty grow louder as Ukraine seeks an urgent $8 billion from the fund, only to be met with the cold shoulder, stating that without EU guarantees, funds will dry up. A shadow of fatigue and fear hangs over the nation's leaders, the ominous ticking clock counting down to a looming default. As discussions pivot, the focus shifts toward seizing frozen Russian assets, an idea floated as a form of justice for the destruction endured. However, this strategy invites backlash from nations like Belgium, who assert that this sets a perilous precedent. If one nation's assets can be seized today, what prevents this from occurring to others tomorrow? The air thickens with tension, as investors grow wary, sensing the fragility of their capital. With growing unrest, capital begins to retreat, fleeing toward safer havens in Switzerland, Asia, and the Emirates. The crisis in Ukraine morphs from a financial emergency into a systemic catastrophe. As voices in Brussels murmur about the risks of losing not just trust among investors, but valuable partnerships worldwide, the dystopian specter of bankruptcy looms ever closer, and as the realization dawns on Kiev, hope seems to flicker dimmer. How long can this web of uncertainty hold? As the country teeters on the brink of collapse, the whispers of betrayal and impending economic doom become a haunting lullaby. Will they find a way to restore stability before it's too late, or is this merely the opening chapter of a far darker saga? In Brussels, officials now grasp the peril. Investors flee a system where assets vanish overnight. Capital flows to safer havens like Switzerland, Asia, and the Emirates. The European Union risks shattering global trust. Losing partners everywhere? That's why seizing Russian assets is a reckless gamble. Failing to draw real investors into this volatile web. What if I told you Zelensky's next deal hands Ukraine's soul to America? Imagine the stench of betrayal in the air, the cold sweat on a nation's brow as resources slip away. Do frantic Ukrainian voices echo in empty halls, pleading, "Is this our savior or our doom?" Even in Brussels, they sense it. No serious investor pours money into a system ripe for plunder. Where fair play is a myth, tomorrow's gains today evaporate. These assets? Once guarantees for IMF loans? The scheme, seize them, erase debts. Failed utterly. Now, no assets mean no trust. Belgian leaders denounce it as reckless adventurism. Their stance clear: economics can't bend to politics. Yet, Kiev clings to hope. Dreaming someone in Washington or Brussels will swoop in, shielding them from ruin. It won't. Europe fears not Russia, but the fallout of rash choices. As Ukrainian officials spout platitudes on TV, Western experts whisper stark truths: Ukraine's economy isn't just faltering. It's teetering on collapse. Have you felt the shiver of inevitability? The acrid bite of unpaid bills piling high. Grinding poverty seeping into every home. Families whispering in dim light, "Who'll feed us next?" In this abyss, Zelensky turns to promise-making. His forte? From creditor to wheeler-dealer. Insider whispers from the sidelines reveal talks. Trump and Kiev plotting. Ukraine barters economic aid for unfettered access. Not aid, real control: gas, oil, uranium, coal, rare earth metals. Named a joint investment. 50-50 split between USA and Ukraine. But truth hides here: control and exports favor American firms. These lands, once battle spoils, now shared prosperity. Zelensky spins it as bold economic alliance. Yet, hollow rhetoric masks surrender. Ukraine cedes assets, gets nothing in return. Americans pay in dollars. Kiev surrenders soil, rivers, mines. Can you taste the bitter irony? The metallic tang of lost sovereignty. Doors slamming shut, alliances crumbling. A leader's final betrayal echoing through history. Ukraine accepts investment? In name only. In essence, a fire sale. Of a ravaged land. Americans' pragmatic game: no need for a strong Ukraine. Just dominion over territory. Channeling resources. Swaying Europe. Zelensky plays the eager pawn. Offering everything: future oil, minerals, to the bone. To stave off fiscal Armageddon. More vows, less freedom. Louder cries of U.S. partnership. Reveal Ukraine's slipping independence. Trump's return? Just formalizes what's done. Ukraine bartered for fleeting aid. Orban's savvy pivot? A chilling contrast. Hungary, once lambasted for Russian ties, now thrives. Dodging sanctions. Securing cheap Russian energy. Feeding Europe's thirst. Trump and Orban align. Both weary of Kiev's endless needs. In U.S. diplomacy realms, Orban promises favors. Signals to Moscow. Europe gets a wake-up call. But Zelensky? Doused in icy reality. Calm energy trades flourish. Enemies' resources now allies. Kiev sidelined. Hungary's deal? Zelensky's folly exposed. If Trump reigns? Costs soar catastrophic. Did the air turn colder then? A nation's gasp at fractured dreams. Accordions playing dirges. Lingering smell of defeat. Was it all for this, you might ask? In an unsettling twist, Ukraine's promise of financial prosperity for its youth feels heartbreakingly hollow. Wealth, it seems, does not trickle down to its families. Instead, it vanishes into foreign bank accounts, those of a select few who signed off on the deals. What may appear to be a lifeline is, in essence, the commodification of the nation's essence. The United States is not interested in a resilient Ukraine, rather, it seeks strategic control over the territory, ensuring a passage for vital resources to influence Europe. Zelensky appears eager to engage, offering assurances that placate international partners while attempting to navigate the financial abyss. Yet every promise made draws deeper lines in the sand of national sovereignty. The more they peddle partnership with America, the clearer it becomes, Ukraine may soon find itself completely reliant on external powers. If Trump were to reclaim the presidency, the truth would hit hard. Ukraine has effectively bartered away its fate for fleeting support. While Ukraine scrambles to secure aid from various international entities, others, like Hungary, pivot toward a more pragmatic approach. Viktor Orbán has deftly maneuvered through Western sanctions, aligning with Russian interests, gaining access to the essential energy resources Europe craves. In a collaborative effort with Trump, Orbán voices a united front against the unending tide of aid to Ukraine, signaling a new geopolitical dynamic. This shift serves as both a warning and a wake-up call to Zelensky. The stakes are rising, and Ukraine forfeits its negotiating power. Could the desire to maintain harmony with the West ultimately lead to isolation? The responsibility falls squarely on Zelensky's shoulders. As political tides change, the risks escalate, and any misstep could come with dire consequences. In the corridors of power, it's clear, Ukraine can't dictate terms any longer. Eastern Europe is subtly recalibrating its alliances, seeking equilibrium between the US and Russia, while Ukraine faces the daunting prospect of standing alone. The road ahead is fraught with uncertainty, and the consequences of previous decisions weigh heavily on the nation's future. Will Zelensky rise to the occasion, or will the anticipated support from the West leave Ukraine in a precarious situation? The clock is ticking, and the answer looms just beyond reach. In these tumultuous times, Ukraine finds itself in a precarious position, unable to assert its will on the world stage. The balance of power in Eastern Europe is shifting, and as alliances fray, the nation grapples with an uncertain future. The specter of failure looms over Ukraine's leadership, primarily resting on President Zelensky's shoulders. Should he falter, as speculation surrounds a potential return of Donald Trump to the White House, the ramifications could spell disaster for the nation. With an air of resignation permeating the capital, Ukraine's hope for survival is dwindling. The political landscape morphs daily, with each passing moment chipping away at Kyiv's influence. As Zelensky extols the virtues of seeking aid from neighboring nations, those very nations converse about their futures, often envisioning them without Ukraine. It is a grim reality that reflects deeper issues of allyship and economic stability. While the narrative of mobilization fills the airwaves, the true state of affairs tells a different story. The front lines are not advancing, instead, they seem to retreat into obscurity. In the bustling streets and crowded coffee shops, charismatic bloggers twist the narrative of war, donning the roles of so-called veterans. Their often misguided and romanticized tales of heroism resonate across Ukraine's media landscape, yet starkly contrast the lived experiences of real soldiers on the front lines. Comfortably ensconced in their warm homes, these self-proclaimed experts emit rhetoric about courage and patriotism, neglecting the underlying struggles gripping actual fighters in the field. They are oblivious to the blaring realities outside their windows, where countless men cower in fear, hunched over in their homes, paralyzed by the specter of conflict. While these empty promises of bravery circulate unchecked, the essence of true valor seems to wither away into the shadows of uncertainty. Even as desperate pleas for support echo in the chambers of power, the grim realities of scarcity and disillusionment continue to loom. And the question lingers, will Ukraine find its footing, or is it destined to fall into the abyss of an economy lost, with fate left in the hands of foreign interests? The tension mounts, the stakes are high, and as the world watches, Ukraine stands at a crossroads, teetering on the edge of an uncertain future. As the nation's financial abyss deepened, shockwaves rippled through every corner of Ukraine, where borders bristled with neglect and whispers of betrayal echoed louder than gunfire. Talks with the US crumbled like sandcastles under the tide, leaving Kyiv scrambling for scraps. Europe slammed the door on guarantees, their empty halls echoing with echoes of apathy. The defense bill bloated beyond $3 trillion, a monstrous silhouette looming over a ravaged land. International lenders demanded Kyiv bow to the Dolgovs, stalwart creditors clutching their ledgers like shields. But Kyiv dangled only paper-thin promises, brittle bonds that crumbled with the ink. Ukraine's pulp mills churned on fumes, its budget swaying on a razor's edge of collapse. Investors fled in a frenzy, their footsteps pounding like war drums fading into the distance. Even Western allies, once torchbearers of faith, extinguished their flames, eyes glazed with disbelief. Leaders preached patriotism like heartfelt sermons, but the pulpit was reality's cruel punchline. Funds evaporated into the ether, battles raged on, and the land teetered on the precipice of default. Desperate to cling to power, Zelensky sealed a covert pact with Washington, bartering away access to Ukrainian governance for a fleeting lifeline. This wasn't alliance, it was the ruthless auctioneering of a country's tattered remains. The IMF withheld funds, Europe bolted its treasury doors, Trump spun webs of deceit, and Ukrainians footed the bill for a bleak tomorrow. Today, we unravel the threads of Ukraine's descent into default's abyss. How Zelensky funnels riches to the US while shadowy hands steer its economy like marionettes. Ukraine now stumbles officially toward default's chasm. Negotiations on Gospel's restructuring for $2.6 billion imploded in spectacular fashion. This wasn't mere pecuniary plight, it embodied the full downward spiral of Ukraine's fiscal fate. Creditors craved ironclad assurances, met only with vaporous pledges and fresh paper obligations spun from promises and VDP warrants. Doubts festered, talks hit a dead-end wall. The defense hole in the budget swelled to trillions in hryvnia, officials fumbling blindly to staunch the bleed. Revenues dwindled, taxes from the front line scarce, elsewhere plundered. The finance ministry touted plans for economic bedrock, yet the country stood hollow, labor force vanished, factories silent, investments ghost-like. Those fit to toil marched off to battle, others exiled in dawn's dispersal. The collapse bred budgetary voids, skies pregnant with despair and perpetual midnights. Leaders evoked unity for the front lines, urging all to rally, but silence shrouded solutions: who mans the mills, who fills the coffers, who feeds the system. Laws bullied citizens from homes for arrears, the state engorging what's left within its grasp. Bankruptcy emerged not just fiscal, but a soul-crushing moral wreckage. Creditor parleys exhausted Solomon's wisdom, failure reigned. Reforms and clarity gave way to illusion, propaganda, and hollow declarations. Ukraine defaults, literal fact, etched in unforgiving numerals. Revenues plummeted, aid trickled to nothing, IMF cloaked in muteness. Worse lurked ahead. IMF talks morphed from diplomacy to raw survival gambles. The fund demanded repayment vows to the US, which devoured Ukraine's dwindling means. Finances unraveled monthly, trust dissolved in the cauldron. Brussels decreed bluntly no EU guarantees, no new tranches unlocked. Europe balked at funding a realm sans stable yields, functional industries, or forward clarity. As per Valdis Dombrovskis, Kiev needed tangible proof, absent as mirages. IMF functioned as unyielding lender, enforcing guarantees, fiscal parity, rubric enforced taxes, responses echoed empty truisms about victory. Economic wins defied televised spectacles. Europe morphed into a wary benefactor. Brussels spotted futility in billions funneling into debt-swamped corruption labyrinths. Here, each aid infusion fueled not rescue, but prolonged agony. Ukraine beseeched $8 billion, IMF signaled no funds sans EU assurances. Europe shunned liability for Kiev's follies. Western support's facade unraveled, thus, figures untrustworthy, allies weary and fearful. What unfolds next starkly evident. Without IMF cash or EU blessings, Ukraine's economy spirals irreversibly. Crises solidified into systemic rot. Default ceased speculation, it beckoned like an inevitability clock. As Kiev grasped IMF refusals, eyes swiveled to plundering Russian frozen assets. Politically framed as righteous reparations, the Kremlin paying Ukraine's destruction toll, but complexities ensnared proceedings. Belgium and fellow EU nations rebelled vehemently. They cautioned, seize one nation's wealth today, precedents open doors to plunder any. Such acts shattered Europe's fiscal scaffolding. Investors, witnessing vulnerability, whisked capital to havens: Switzerland, Asia, Emirates. For Europe, peril loomed in shedding not only investor faith, but global partner bonds. Thus, asset seizure notions fizzled amid sharp backlash. Even Brussels foresaw investors shunning brittle systems where holdings evaporated overnight. Assets once collateral for IMF loans crumbled into dust without faith's veneer. The gambit to siphon funds for debt relief. Imagine this: a once proud nation stands on the brink, its coffers empty like a hollowed-out vault in a forgotten cellar, debts echoing like thunder across barren fields. Ukraine teeters on bankruptcy. With a defense budget ballooning to $3 trillion, are you shocked? Investors flee as if the ground burns underfoot, while Western allies turn away, leaving Ukraine's economy to crumble into default dust. In the shadows of global finance turmoil, Ukraine's government bends like a reed in the wind, desperate to cling to power. Negotiations with the United States shattered into splinters of mistrust. Europe slammed its doors shut, refusing ironclad guarantees. Those international creditors, they haul for repayment on those mountain-high debts Dolgovi papal, yet all Kiev can muster are flimsy paper obligations, empty promises that shimmer like mirages in the desert heat. Investors scatter like startled birds, their trust evaporated into thin air. Even those steadfast Western partners lose faith, no longer bewitched by Ukrainian miracles. The government's cries of patriotism ring hollow, a bitter echo in the fog of reality. Funds dry up, slipping away like sand through fingers, while the war grinds on, bombs rattling the earth, the acrid smell of smoke clinging to the skin. Default looms like a storm cloud on the horizon. To grasp at control, Zelensky inked a shadowy pact with Washington, handing over access to Ukraine's governance like a thief parting with stolen jewels. This isn't an alliance, it's an auction of the country's remnants, a shameful barter to appease looming failures. Now, imagine the chilling twist: the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, withholds its lifeline, while Europe locks the doors, and even Trump's words dissolve in the wind. Ukrainians bear the brunt of a future mortgaged to disaster. Why does Ukraine march toward economic oblivion? Who truly steers its fate as Zelensky barters resources away? Brace yourself for the unfolding betrayal. Ukraine plunges officially into default shadows. Restructuring talks for $2.6 billion sputtered out in flames. Far beyond mere financial strain, this marks the tragic full circle of an economy in freefall. Creditors demanded tangible assurances, but Kiev dangled only airy promises, fresh paper debts, and vague warrants, those empty vows from Zelensky that scattered like dry leaves in autumn. Disbelief reigned supreme, negotiations crashed into a dead-end impasse, investors slamming doors with audible thuds. Defense outlays swell to trillions in hryvnia, straining the budget like a creaking ship in stormy seas. Authorities flounder, clueless how to patch this gaping wound. Revenues dwindle, taxes erode under the siege of frontlines, where every boom of artillery sends shivers down spines, the metallic tang of fear thick in the air. The Ministry of Finance chants spells of economic stability, yet reality bites, no workforce thrives, enterprises lie fallow, investments vanish into the ether. Gone are the hands that once built futures, many enlisted in the army, others fled the relentless strife. Budget woes bleed inward, leaving hollow coffers amid empty factories and silent assembly lines. The government rallies with calls to unite, to rally to the front, but who digests this? Who labors in the fields of commerce? Who feeds taxes into the gaping maw? In this desperate grab, laws enable seizing citizens' homes for debts, as the state clutches at dwindling riches within. This bankruptcy scars not just finances, but the soul, a moral abyss where trust rusts away. Creditors' entreaties, last-ditch pleas, failed utterly. No reforms, no light, only pat slogans, hollow displays, and soldiers standing proud to no avail. Ukraine stands bankrupt, not in metaphor, but in cold, confirmed figures. Revenues plummet, deficits soar, the IMF's silence roars like an unforgiving gale. The abyss yawns deeper still. Pivot to the survival dance with the IMF, not diplomacy, but a frenzy for breath. The fund demands guarantees of repayment, yet Ukraine's freight edges can't bear the weight. Tax collection stumbles, the economy decays month by relentless month, a descent as palpable as frost creeping over warm earth. Trust? That's shattered into shards, no faith left to mend. In far-off Brussels, voices ring clear: shrink the risk, guarantee the fund's advances. Europe's leery, recoiling from a land devoid of steady incomes, vibrant industries, even a map for long-term returns. Valdemar Dombrovsky warns, stark as a slap, real feasibilities needed, but none exist. The IMF stands not as a benefactor, but a stern creditor, unyielding in demands for assurances, budget balance, robust revenue streams. To Ukraine's refrain, "We'll conquer everything." Yet, triumphs won through telethons and slogans? Utter folly. Europe tires of this endless almsgiving to Ukraine's voids. Brussels insiders whisper, why funnel billions into the maw of debts and graft? Each aid shipment morphs into fresh chains, not salvation's dawn. Ukraine begs $8 billion from the IMF, but the fund digs in no tranche without Europe's bail. The continent balks, unwilling to shoulder another's blunders. Behold the facade crumbling. Western support? A brittle illusion, crumbling under the strain of numbers, exhaustion, mounting dread. What's next? A cascade inescapable. Without IMF funds and European bonds, Ukraine's economy spirals into the vortex. Financial meltdown metastasizes systemically. Default? No longer a specter, inevitable. In Kiev's confines, realizing the IMF shutoff, minds pivoted cunningly toward frozen Russian assets, a move framed as righteous retribution. Moscow must foot Ukraine's devastation bills, a story sold with righteous fire. But complications ignited like dry tinder. Belgium and allied lands rose in fury, drawing lines stark as battle scars, seize funds today, and chaos reigns tomorrow. Was no barrier left for any nation's wealth? This breach erodes Europe's financial fortress, sowing panic among investors, fearing their capitals naked to seizure. Funds would hemorrhage to sanctuaries, Switzerland, Asia, the Emirates. Loss loomed colossal, not just investor flight, but global alliances fracturing in disbelief. Thus, Russia's asset raid idea detonated as a powder keg, still reverberating. Even Brussels grasps the peril, no wise investor dares pump funds into such treacherous waters. Where tomorrow's confiscation whispers danger. Those assets were earmarked as collateral for IMF loans, a ploy to siphon and repay. Yet, the gambit backfired spectacularly. Without faith, those assets sit idle, unguaranteed. Belgian voices label it reckless, a perilous gamble. Dollars can't be weaponized politically. Hopes flicker vainly that Washington or Brussels might relent, sparing default's abyss. Vanity. Europe trembles not before Russia, but its own disastrous gambles. Beneath Ukrainian foreign ministry broadcasts on telethons, Western seers proclaim, Ukraine's economy doesn't merely wane, it's poised for annihilation. At this crisis peak, Zelensky plunges deeper, a move strangest of all. He peddles promises anew, morphing from leader to desperate haggler. Word murmurs from the capital's corridors, fresh parleys with Trump brew, trading economic lifelines for depths of access. Not aid, but dominion over gas veins, oil flows, uranium veins, coal seams, rare earth treasures. Framed as joint ventures, a 50-50 split between America and Ukraine. Illusion shattered, control slips to U.S. firms, exports redirected westward. Yesterday's domains, inherited from Soviet legacies, now phrase as economic unity's fruits. Zelensky touts it as renaissance, gilded in cooperation's hue. Always, grandiose rhetoric veils surrender's sting. No funds arrive for Ukraine, instead, assets depart, lands, rivers, mines bartered for promises. Dreams of Ukraine's youth reveling in mineral riches? Utopian haze. History's ledger shows such wealth enriching foreign vaults, not local hearths. This isn't investment, it's forfeiture. Ukraine auctioned piecemeal for fleeting succor. America, pragmatic, craves no robust Ukraine, dominion suffices, resources flowing, Europe influenced. Zelensky fits the puppet's role perfectly, pledging sovereignty scrap for a glimmer of solvency. Each vow erodes autonomy further. As hails of U.S. partnership swell, Ukraine's independence dims irreversibly. Trump returns? He merely codifies the done deal, Ukraine, a spoil traded for unstable aid. While Kiev pleads with IMF and Washington, outsiders maneuver deftly. Hungary, once lambasted for Russian ties, rebels in ascendancy. Viktor Orban sidestepped sanctions, safeguarded Russian energy, securing Europe's coveted fuels via back channels. Trump and Orban align slyly, both decry Ukraine's bottomless support pit. In recent U.S. powwows, conditions align, Orban advances American designs, pinging signals to Moscow. Europe shudders, Zelensky chills. Now, Hungary's Russian oil imports flow unencumbered, enemy of my enemy, a pragmatic pact, with Kiev barred from objection. Interference arises? Zelensky shoulders blamed solo. Trump's White House re-entrance? Catastrophes multiply. Washington's scribes openly decry, Ukraine cedes its diktat, Eastern Europe recalibrates, balancing between U.S. might and Russian shadow. Orban emerges as the paragon of shrewdness, clashing not with the West, yet thriving on Eastern nexus. Ukraine languishes isolated, the tormented outlier. And here the zenith peaks. What unseen forces propel Zelensky to barter Ukraine's essence while venal hands snatch fleeting band-aids? The humiliation burns, Western backers, once saviors. Reveal predatory grins. Russia? Mere casus belli. The true vanquishers lurk within, orchestrating division's dirge. Ukraine, a mythos fractured, teeters as Slavs clash southeastward. America's hunger for hegemony ignites anew, Ukraine ensnared in puppeteer's web. The clang of defeat resounds. Zelensky, once hopeful herald, descends to nadir. Has desperation birthed a faceless empire's echo? The bitter irony stings, fighting for freedom, yet shackles tighten under deals cloaked as destiny. Investors evaporate, morality corrodes, yet the cycle perpetuates. Will Ukraine awaken from leverage's harrowing embrace? Can the people summon the roar of reclamation? As economic gales howl, what monstrous pact brews in the dim? The storm rages on. End.